Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to this AWARE webinar. We're going to be talking about the benefits of peer support in managing depression. So we're just going to take a moment or two to allow people to join. So take a minute to settle in and we'll get going shortly. Welcome again, everyone. Thanks for those who are joining. My name is Dr. Susan Brannock. I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical director with AWARE. As I said, I'm delighted to be joined by my panel today to be talking about managing depression with peer support. So for those of you, just before we get going into our discussion, for those of you who aren't familiar with AWARE, so we run these AWARE webinars on the second Wednesday of every month. Certainly we have a good few to look back over the year if you're interested on our website, so aware.ie, where you'll find more information about education support for people experiencing depression and bipolar disorder, including those supporting a loved one. So just before we kind of start talking today, a reminder that there'll be lots of space for questions. So if you want to ask anything about the groups that hasn't come up, please do please do ask questions that you might have. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. We may not be able to comment on specifics for people, but we'll be able to try to tell a bit more about the experiences of the group. Unfortunately, we can't take questions after the webinar. So if you do have any questions or concerns that you're left with, and we'd really encourage you to speak to your GP or a mental health professional. So I'm delighted now maybe to get going. I might start with asking the panel to introduce themselves. So if I start with you, Rosemary, could you just introduce yourself and let us know who you are?
Sure thing. I'm Rosemary Carvill and I work with AWARE. I have done for about 11 years now, and I'm the support and self-care group manager.
Thanks, Rosemary. You're very welcome, and thanks for joining today. And Kevin?
So I'm Kevin. I've been volunteering with AWARE for about 13 months now, and I'm a in-person support group facilitator.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And you're very welcome. Thank you for joining. And lastly, but not least, Fiona.
Hi, Susan. Hi, everybody. My name is Fiona. I have been volunteering as a face-to-face facilitator with AWARE for about 7 years now. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for joining. You're very welcome, and very welcome everyone too who is joining along. So as I was saying, today we're going to talk about the benefits of peer support in managing depression. So I suppose before we get into the kind of what the groups are about, maybe it might be helpful for me to, I suppose, to say a couple of things maybe about groups and peer support more generally, and certainly guys do kind of chip in if anything that I'm saying resonates with you, if you want to add anything. I suppose maybe the first thing to think about is that we know for people who experience depression, they're more likely to be socially isolated. So there's been a lot of research into whether, I suppose, depression can lead to social isolation, or whether social isolation can lead to depression. So it's probably likely to be a bi-directional pathway, but we know that people who do experience low mood and depression might be in patterns of withdrawal or outside of social groups to an extent. So there's something very crucial, I think, about the group aspect that we'll talk about today. So there's something about the importance of that in terms of targeting feelings of loneliness and isolation. And I'm sure as we'll get into that sort of idea of finding shared meaning maybe and connecting. So I think that's what we all need, whether we experience depression or not. So I saw a quote there recently, actually, I think was it Mother Teresa, I think, who said that the illnesses are less so of what she was dealing with in the past, but now the more concerning illnesses are that experience of not belonging, which really struck me actually of how important it is to belong in whatever group that is, and how important those kind of social relationships are for us. In clinical psychology, I suppose we talk a lot about the people's internal processes, but mainly what people come for help with are relationships and how their difficulties impact on those important relationships in their lives. So relationships and group membership is really key. I think that's maybe the first thing to consider when we think about peer support. And I suppose the other bit in terms of what we know about depression treatment, I guess essentially we have two main interventions, don't we, over the last kind of however long, maybe 40, 50 years. So we have medication and we have psychotherapy. So they're the kind of mainstays of what someone might be offered who is experiencing depression. That combination or either or can work very well for people, but there's still a very high prevalence of depression. So it's not going away. If anything, it's increasing. So I suppose this model of peer support, and we're going to get into exactly what that is, has been shown actually to be quite effective in terms of reducing depression symptoms for people. It's been linked to fewer hospitalizations for depression, and longer term outcomes in terms of recovery. So I guess recovery is going to mean something different for different people. But generally, and you guys might say a bit more about this, sort of CHIME is a common sort of theme in recovery. So that acronym for connectedness, so that the importance of sort of connecting, identity, hope, meaning, and empowerment, which I think we'll kind of talk throughout the session as we go about how the groups might offer that. So I guess that's a bit of an overview about why I suppose the peer support is very useful, both in terms of offering kind of group support, but also as a growing kind of additional intervention for managing or coping with depression. So maybe given that sort of background, Rosemary, if I start with you, I think this was quite revolutionary actually at the time, if we think back to how Aware maybe started. And I wonder if you might be able to talk us through kind of how these groups emerged and how it all began.
Sure. I'll keep the history brief.
Sure.
But yeah, Dr. Patrick McKeown set up Aware with a group of really dedicated volunteers. And it really was in response to a recognized need, I guess, at the time for information and for support. And that was for group members, family members, relatives of the person experiencing depression or bipolar disorder. And, they recognized that need, and that's 38 years ago. They came together in very much like a recovery model. It was family members, it was people with their own experience, their lived experience, and professionals coming together to try and find some way of supporting people to move forward. And I suppose, like, we're here 38 years later, and it was obvious that they sort of found a niche, I suppose. And we still have these dedicated volunteers, and some of them are actually around more than 30 years. And then others are newer, and we're always looking for people to come along and support us. And I guess, I suppose, when you look at the service now, we have groups in person in cities nationwide. But we also, thanks to COVID, there was one side of it was a help to us in that we had to change our service and develop services for people on Zoom. And also we have a phone-in group. So we now operate groups 7 days a week, and these are accessible to people in the wilds of Kerry and Northern Donegal. People can either ring us or to join a group or join on Zoom or come to the ones in the cities that are face-to-face. And I suppose the other thing that's happened over the last few years as well is that we now run a bipolar specific program, Living Well with Bipolar Disorder. And we run specific groups for people with bipolar disorder as well now, that wouldn't be necessarily on the website because it's specifically for that group of people. And the same goes for relatives. After the relatives program, relatives can now access a group. And the other one, I suppose, the people would be less familiar about, that kind of in response to a European issue, the war in Ukraine. We run Ukrainian groups in Ukrainian with Ukrainian psychologists who were refugees from the war. So that's a different offering again. So there's a lot more, I think, underneath the surface than just saying support the self-care groups. There's a lot more going on.
There's a huge amount going on, isn't there?
Yeah,
And as you say,
yeah,
kind of maybe trying to meet the needs of different groups.
yeah,
And maybe we'll talk a bit more about kind of what's involved in the groups, but it's interesting, isn't it? I certainly would have thought, God, I don't know how a group's going to work on Zoom. We probably all thought that in the beginning, didn't
yeah,
we?
yeah,
And that sort of idea, like, will you have the same experience? But as you say, it might also be the difference of someone who's living quite remote can access this peer support, and maybe in a bit more of an anonymous sort of a way. So it may not be the people who
yeah.
live in the village or the town or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and very much so. I think our phone-in group is such a
Mm,
wonderful offering, because for people who are afraid of technology or anything, they can connect over the phone. Most people
yeah.
can still work the phone, and that's one of the ways, I suppose, of dipping your toes in the water if you're nervous about coming forward to get peer
Yeah.
support, because our mood is such an isolating thing, as you said, and people are shy about coming forward to say, I'm really struggling. So
Mm,
that's the importance of the groups. It's for people struggling with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and other mood-related conditions, just coming together to
mm.
support one another. So yeah.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah, thank you, Rosemary. And we might talk a bit more about kind of that Zoom and I guess maybe the different sorts of things that people might come with in terms of accessing the peer support. But maybe if I go to you, Fiona, about kind of, let's say that someone's thinking, okay, so you've got all these groups, what kind of goes on in them, or what would they be expecting, do you think, if they've never been before?
I suppose, Susan, that's probably a bit frightening for some people. They say, oh,
Mm,
there's a group there, but what is it going to be like? Am I going to, do I have to walk into this strange room? How am I going to manage all this? But once they sign up on the Aware website and they're saying they're coming to a group, for example, I do a face-to-face one day a week in Dublin City. And so when they arrive, we have, and they wouldn't necessarily be aware of it, but we have a very good process. And we have been very well trained and guided by Aware into how to run a meeting. And so the main thing is the structure. They arrive, the two facilitators are always there, the room is set around in a nice circle. And the whole thing is that they feel comfortable, and there's a warmth, even if they're not feeling very relaxed, that they feel that the facilitators at least are acknowledging them and welcoming them. We go through the process of how the meeting works, and I find this really helpful because it's a grounding for everybody. People come in, they may have been on buses and may have been stressed by that. They may be rushing from work to come to attend a meeting. It may be their first time. So we sit and we read out how the meeting is going to work. And we do the same thing and we use the same words every week. We're obviously very careful with our tone, that we're not sort of, given strict rules, but this is how the meeting is going to go. And so that people, and it grounds everybody. And this process that Aware have really worked on and continually work on. For example, recently they added on something into our process that when we have read out how the meeting goes, we take 3 deep breaths. Now, that's very powerful when you're sitting in a group, because if you're anxious and if you, as I say, you have been stressed, that it just grounds everybody and there's a bit of peace and quiet in the room. And then we ask if anybody would like to share how they're feeling. And so it's, and then if somebody would like to share, we've already said in the process that we will ask if they would like support from the group. Nobody's under pressure to talk at all. Nobody's under pressure to share, and nobody's under pressure to accept tips or supports from anybody. So it's very carefully done to protect. And we as facilitators are not there to give advice. That is absolutely not us. We may use certain language, like we may, you want to acknowledge and affirm the fact that somebody has made an effort to come to a group. And by even just coming to the group, that in itself can be huge for somebody who's struggling. And so you want to affirm that. So you're not probing, you're not looking for, and tell me more, nothing like that. And it's because it is the people within the group who are there to help and support each other. And I find it really powerful. And every week a meeting is different because people's moods and feelings are different. But even within that, it is it's a privilege to be there, but it is powerful, the effect that a group can have. People can come in and they may be coming in saying, I'm not speaking today, I'm not speaking, and they won't and they mightn't. And then, 85 minutes into a meeting, they may say, look, I've just had a tough week, but I'm glad I came, or like that. So yeah, sorry for going on a bit, but
No. No, it's really helpful, Fiona, because I guess if you're not familiar with it, it's actually really important to know what it looks like, because I
yeah,
think it's a very common experience, isn't it, to maybe know that something exists. So the journey between you knowing that you might need help and the journey to getting to somewhere that could offer that can be quite a long journey in a sense. And you'd hear about people kind of maybe sitting in the car for hours or kind of working your way up. Well, maybe I'll go next week. So I suppose it's quite helpful to know, as you say, one, it's very predictable. So I suppose it has that psychological safety, doesn't it? So it's not just random kind of all kind of different stuff. It's actually, there's a structure and a framework to it. So one that allows people to arrive, because it's actually quite stressful generally getting to somewhere, never mind if you're going to open up and be vulnerable. So it allows that space, doesn't it? And then also it says, well, this is how the group kind of works, and that's the same. So as you say, maybe people will bring stuff week by week, but the framework is the same. And I think you touched on something really important there as well, that I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is maybe sit alongside someone without having to fix. So, and it's not about, as you say, giving advice, because most people will have tried everything already, won't
Yeah.
they? And they know what's helped and what's not helped. So and I guess as we often say, there's no shortage of people in our lives who have advice to offer us. So this group is about maybe sitting with something, and maybe sometimes someone's experience may be useful, sometimes maybe it might be different, but it's an allowing of whatever is there just to be there, maybe, would you say?
completely, Susan. And the thing that people will say to us, because that, and what's really important for us to do is to actively listen to people. So it's not to be jumping in, but that people feel that you are actually listening to what they're saying, and you're not just saying, okay, now I'll let this person talk for 3 minutes or whatever. So as facilitators, we are very attentive to how people are feeling within a group, and how, some people might be feeling really low and their head may be down a little bit, or they don't want to engage, but we are actively sort of looking out for them there in that group without saying anything. And I think that is exactly as you say, sitting with people without sort of judgment, without saying anything, is really one of the powerful things within the group. Yeah, completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? And I guess I saw you nodding along there, Kevin, and I just I wonder what your experience was as someone who had been to the group and now you facilitate.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll start off with how I started going to the groups. So about 11 or 12 years ago, mental health was declining, and I think when most people attend the groups, it declined further than it needed to, because I just didn't feel like it was possible to really reach out for help or support. But I was lucky enough and privileged enough time to be in college where they had an integrated health centre. So I had access to a GP, psychiatrist, counselling service, and it was through them they actually recommended the Aware support groups. There's one running in the college at the time. So I started attending that. And I can still remember my first meeting, walking up to the doors, climbing the stairs, feeling my heart rate going up, the cold sweat starting, just anxiety crescendoing as I walked into the room. But as soon as I sat down, it was strangely fine. Just being there, it was getting there, was the hard part. Sitting down was like, whatever happens, I'm here now. The way the groups worked was quite different back then, but the feel has stayed the same, which is it's welcoming, it's open, it's warm. I suppose the word is gentle. It's always very gentle. And as a facilitator, that's always what I try to keep in mind. Be kind and be gentle, even when we're setting boundaries, when we're explaining to someone that the group, we can't work this way, etc., etc. It's to be kind and gentle with everyone in that group. And that was my experience. And unfortunately, back then, the group was very small. So the reason I actually stopped going was just there's only 2 or 3 of us each week. And ultimately, it's not a peer support group. There's no peers to either offer support to or receive support from. But aware stayed in my mind after that. Like, it made a big enough impression that I stayed kind of aware of what aware was doing. And I started trying to volunteer a couple of years for their session. But I think in Rosemary campus, I think they had a lot more people volunteering back then and a lot more volunteers in general. So it was only during, so after session, during COVID, so it was only during COVID that I was actually accepted into the program. So I've been volunteering for the last 13 months, running a face-to-face group as Fiona is doing. Actually, I trained with Fiona. I sat in with her group, so I got the experience with Fiona early on.
Oh, brilliant.
But in terms of how the groups feel these days, so just to echo what Fiona said in terms of, for people with mental health issues, one of the key things that comes up over and over is anxiety and fear of the unknown. It doesn't matter what you're suffering from, it is just pervasive anxiety and fear of unknown situations, which I think is one of the factors that leads to us not leaving our house, not leaving our room, because at least there it's safe and it's known. But we, at the very beginning as facilitators, we make the group known to you as a new member. As Fiona said, we explain the processes, we explain the boundaries, and we're very, very careful in terms of ensuring the boundaries are the same, both week in, week out, but also between different groups. So if someone goes to my group, which is different from Fiona's, they'll have generally the same experience, or at least the same boundaries, which again, it makes it known, it makes it safe, and it makes it easier. I suppose it's one place outside your house or maybe outside your workplace that is safe and known and comfortable, with the added benefit of you get to connect with people who are suffering similar things to you, or at least will understand and empathize with what you feel comfortable sharing there. And the support groups are one place where people can just share. This is how I'm really feeling. This is how my week is really going. There's no need to put on a facade. There's no need to pretend everything's fine. It's just a bad week. You can just be as honest as you want to be, or as open as you want to be. But as Fiona also said, a new member of the group doesn't have to share. They can just sit there and listen and connect. And you don't need to be active to connect. You can connect just in hearing that other people are feeling similar things to you. And if someone comes to a group 3 weeks in a row and says nothing, they can still gain a huge benefit. And there's still a benefit to the group because they are there listening and they're there, participating, even if they're not speaking.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? That idea, because for a lot of people, it's quite intimidating, that idea of having to speak in a group. And I can imagine that might potentially put people off. A lot of people aren't so good with that. Now, even if it's something neutral, never mind something personal, so as you say, I think that's a really important piece, that you don't have to talk. If you don't want to, you can go and you can listen and hear experiences, and that can be as kind of helpful. It's about, I suppose, maybe to my mind, I think the groups are about meeting people where they are, isn't it? So there's no obligation to have to share everything, or it's just, as you say, Kevin, it's a space that you can say, actually, I've had a really, really bad week. And no one's going to try to, or feel distressed by that, or, like have to feel that they need to do something for you. It's a space that can be sort of allowed into, isn't it?
And it's a space where you can just have had a bad week. And even if they don't want to share it, they can just go there because they've had a bad week, sit there having had a bad week, and that's enough. And that's okay. And we're not going to ask any more than that. And that's why we make clear at the beginning of each meeting, as Fiona said, that we specify, if you're new to the group, there's no expectation that you will speak. There's no expectation that you will share or offer support. And we also emphasize, if you do share, it's perfectly fine to say you don't want to receive support from the group. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe you just want to get something out. That's fine. There are no obligations, expectations on you as a group member beyond adhering to the guidelines in terms of how you communicate with the group members. That's it. So you can come here and we will meet you where you are. And if that's just being silent and feeling like maybe just somewhere, maybe you can start to belong, that's fine with us. We're just facilitators. We're happy to meet you where you are.
And sometimes even in the group, you'll find that's everybody feels like being a little bit quiet, And I think that can be very unnerving for somebody new coming along to the group, that that the facilitators open the space for people to share if they wish, and maybe nobody is in the right space at just that minute or 2 minutes or even 3 minutes. And suddenly, if we sat in silence for 3 minutes now, people would want to start filling that space, So it's important for people to maybe think about, that that's something they might meet if they come to a group. But it can be a very mindful moment. It's people just being together. And it's very powerful, again, to be just sitting with people, I suppose almost in solidarity with the fact that some things maybe not right in my life, but we can be here together and just support each other in a very, it's sort of a silent but strong way. You know, it's very empowering actually to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I guess it's sort of that sort of being with rather than doing to, isn't it? That we might say in kind of mental health. And as you say, it's quite unusual, isn't it? Like we have an inclination as people to fill the gaps. So there is something quite powerful actually to allow that silence. And a lot of stuff might come up in that. And I suppose maybe that's where someone might connect with their breathing or feet on the floor or maybe kind of palms of the hands. So it's not about leaving someone in something, but it's about kind of also not having to speak. And as you said, Rosemary, but a lot of people might turn up on a day where it's not very talkative, and other times it might be very talkative. Yeah. And I guess maybe one of the key things is that it's the group that offers the peer support, I think, as everyone's saying. So the volunteers like yourselves are facilitators. And then if Fiona, as you said, so you may share or not, but if you share, then there's an invitation. Do you want to hear back from the group? And you might say yes or no to that. So that's where the peer support sort of lies in it. And people might have various bits and pieces to offer. So some of the groups I sat in when I started with Aware we're often like just I hear you, you know, that's really resonates with me. And I think that, as you say, that's very powerful, isn't it? It sort of punctures that feeling of isolation, because depression and anxiety can be very isolating, as we said. You can feel like you're the only person who's experiencing this. So that can be a very helpful.
Susan, on that, I would add that it's for people who it comes up all the time. I'm sure Kevin will agree with me on this, that people feel comfortable or made feel comfortable because they feel other people understand. And frequently they will say, my family don't understand, or my family are fed up with me doing this, or they're fed up with me not coping with this, or that I should do this. I feel understood here. I feel because other people are going through it. And again, that's really, really helpful. This time of the year in particular, this time of the year can be very tough for people who are living with depression or anxiety, because it's coming up to Christmas. There are lots of extra social events within the family, and the family conflicts can be an issue, or how you're going to spend the day and that. And it's these few meetings in December, I've always found that there's great support. You know, this is how I cope with it, and this is how I handle. I arrive early at the family event, and I leave early, and I protect myself in that way. And just the support. So it's just a particular time of the year that people need maybe support and tips on how you manage the situations that heighten your anxiety, or make you feel a little bit more isolated because you're not out, socializing the same extent as other family members. So it's that sense of being understood and understanding the season that we're in. And Kevin would probably agree with me. You know, every season has its own challenges. You know, for some people, the sort of the shortening of the evenings can be a struggle, but for other people, it's the long summer evenings when it's bright outside and they feel everybody's outside. And so, and then people, they give each other, again, supportive tips on how they cope with all the seasonality of where they are. So, every meeting is different, and every season is different.
Yeah, it's really true, isn't it? And until you meet other people, let's say that for a lot of people might experience a low mood in the summer for lots of different reasons. Until you meet other people who have that or hear that, you just think that you're the only person. Everyone else is off having a great time at barbecues and parties, and what's wrong with you that these long days when you should be out and happy and you're not. And then, as you say, you hear kind of again, that's a sort of shared experience, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think just we call it a peer support group, and it's like something I only really understood when I started facilitating was the difference between advice and support. And advice can be part of support, but we are there to offer a peer support group. And support can be, as you said earlier about isolation, support can just be having somewhere that takes you out of isolation, somewhere where you're not lonely because you're surrounded by people who are your peers. And when people offer, we call them supportive reflections rather than say advice. And that's key. It can be people just reflecting on their similar experience to you to say at the end, I don't have any advice to give, but I really empathize with what you said. I feel the same way. And that's all I can tell you. And that is support. It's not advice, but quite often people don't really need advice. What they get from it is just someone listened to me. Someone listened to me sharing how I feel, and they care enough to actually offer tips that I probably already know, but they listened and they care. Or they just empathize and said, I feel the same way. It really does suck. But that's all there is to it. And we're there, or the groups are there for support. And support takes so many different shapes and forms that I only really started to understand when I was facilitating the groups. But they are so supportive. And I can see people being supported and leaving the group after an hour and a half looking different, just from having shared, from having received support, from having connected. And it's really powerful. I know Fiona mentioned powerful earlier, but it's really powerful to see it in action. And as facilitators, we're mostly invisible. Like if we're doing a good job, we really shouldn't be doing much at all, which sounds a bit like an oxymoron, but it's true. We're there to help the group do what the group needs to do within our boundaries and our structure. So if I do very little during a group, I feel like that's a job well done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like nearly, so being in the background, as you say, and allowing that group to flow. And Rosemary, it looks like you're nodding a lot there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, you know, as Fiona says, it's a privilege, you know, to be, I suppose, allowed to sit in with the groups, which is part of my role, you know, that I sit in on groups around the country. And I'm always, you know, I find it an extraordinary gift, I suppose, to listen to people being as honest about how they're actually feeling, not the surface stuff, but how they're actually feeling. And then being able to put themselves aside on a really, you know, if they may be really distressed, and then putting themselves aside to hear somebody else. You know how difficult it is yourself when you're having a really bad day or something, and you know, you kind of not in tune with others, you know. But that's to me very powerful, you know, that people at their lowest ebb can still say, you know, I'm putting myself away now and I'm going to hear you. And it's empowering for the people who are low to suddenly realize that their experience of depression has a value to somebody else because it's a different perspective of depression, you know. So that allows people to take something away with them that perhaps they didn't come in with. And it's that understanding, that shared feeling that Kevin is speaking of there, just connectedness and community.
Yeah, absolutely. And as it's so key, isn't it? Because I suppose we're in different roles in our lives, aren't we? And I suppose in the kind of biomedical model, kind of a patient doctor relationship, you only get the one role. Whereas in the group, as you say, you can offer your experiences, you can offer an ear, you can offer empathy. So you transcend the narrow kind of binary of I'm someone with X or Y. It's actually you're a whole person, and there can be different parts of the self that can be activated in that space. So it's, and also that sort of kind of interrupts that kind of very, again, that kind of maybe negative self-talk about kind of self-esteem or how you see yourself actually. And I've seen that in the groups as well, of someone who might have shared, who's felt very low, and then can inhabit a different space and hear something and really be with that. So it's actually quite amazing, isn't it? And you don't really get that in, you know, a doctor's office, because as I said, you're just kind of in that maybe separate space. Yeah. So we've got some really good questions. Oh, sorry, Fiona, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with you with that. It's, you know, people come in and they talk about they go to their medical professions, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the group is, they're on an equal, and they're treated, everybody is treated the same. And you know, just I want to say one thing though, if you don't mind, Susan. Sometimes within groups, tough things come up.
Yeah.
And I just think to say to people that are thinking of coming to a group, again, we have a way that we protect people and we look after people. There is a confidentiality policy, so there are certain issues if they come up during the meeting that we need to sort of delve, maybe just protect the person and just make sure that they're all right. So there is a policy, and that is explained to everybody on it. And if we have concerns about anybody that they're particularly low, we will always check in with them, particularly on a one-to-one, and just make sure that they're all right and that they have extra supports for when they leave the meeting. So I think that's very important.
It's hugely important, and I guess it's part of that framework, as we said. So this isn't just an open sort of space where anything happens. There's actually quite a strong framework to it. It's private, it's confidential, so you're not going to hear that like spoken about outside. But there's, as you say, if we're really worried about someone, then we're obviously going to respond to that, because that's what it means to care for someone. And if we hear something, then we act on it with the person collaboratively. So it's about kind of keeping the space safe for the individual, but also for the group as well. And that is really key. And I think maybe there's a question in there that maybe kind of relates to that, actually. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it, anyone. But so if you're feeling low, how can you have the energy and tolerance to listen to others' issues, and how to self-protect? So you may feel overwhelmed with your own difficulties and find it maybe that you may not want to absorb other people's pain. Don't know what anyone thinks about that, just from your experience of running the groups. Maybe Rosemary?
I mean, just what struck me immediately on that question is somebody who worked with Aware some years ago. I can remember hearing her saying, it is a tragedy for, what maybe you're hearing, but it's not your tragedy. So I suppose when people come to the groups, it's a very sort of safe space to hear others, but not to take on that piece. So that line sometimes, because we're all human, we're all unique and impacted then uniquely by the mood we're experiencing. And, obviously things might resonate in a way that's very emotional even for facilitators on a given night. Something that they may hear may sort of distress them. However, it is about putting that little boundary in place. So maybe coming up with some little statement for yourself as this is saddening story that I'm hearing, but it's not my story. So you don't take ownership of it. I don't know if that answered the question. It's what came up for me anyway.
No, that's a really good answer. Thank you, Rosemary. It's really important, isn't it? So it's not mine. It's not my story. And I suppose we're talking about the groups. They're really helpful, but they're one piece of a puzzle of someone's whole care, their whole lives. So people will have a lot of different stuff in there as well. So this is one part of it. And I guess maybe it's acknowledging. Also, maybe, I don't know what other people think about this, but if you're in a space also that you feel like you might usually go to a group, or you're thinking about going to a group, but you're not sure you can manage that, you also don't have to. You can go another day, and maybe when you feel a bit more able to hear that, because people know themselves better, don't they? So you might know, actually, tonight's not a night for me to be in this sort of space.
That's something I should emphasize as well. And I say it to all new members, all first-time people who attend, is there's no obligation to attend week in, week out. You're not signing up to a service. There's going to be no opprobrium if you don't come back for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Even what we'd call regular group members will often just not be there for a few weeks, and that's perfectly okay. There's no stigma attached to it. There's no negativity attached to it. Maybe you'll attend once and come back in 6 months. That's fine. There's no problem whatsoever. There are no obligations. So don't be afraid that if you don't come back a second week, that you shouldn't come back the third week, even if you're feeling up to it. In terms of feeling overwhelmed and low, I think that's most people who attend are feeling overwhelmed and low, and everyone has a different reaction to it. A lot of group members, in my experience, it helps hearing other people also feeling overwhelmed and suffering. It makes them feel less overwhelmed because they feel less singular, individual almost. It's not just them suffering these feelings. But some people actually won't listen. They're so overwhelmed that they will just sit there in their own thoughts until it's their chance to speak, or maybe they won't speak at all. That's okay too. And we've had group members who just felt so overwhelmed that they just needed to leave. And of course, we stood up, walked them out, made sure they're okay, and that's no problem as well. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, anything is okay in terms of whatever you need to do to cope. But for most group members, not all group members, in my experience, they feel less overwhelmed being there. Now, whatever their tactic is or technique is to stay there for 90 minutes, they feel less overwhelmed when they leave.
Mm.
And Susan, I would say to that person as well, you know, and this comes up, there's some phrases that come up during groups all the time, but some of them are very, very effective. And one of them is, you know, this whole thing, how do I eat an elephant, you know, and you eat it bite, bite, bite. So maybe just break it down into small steps and maybe just get to the meeting and just get that be the goal, just to get to the meeting, and then just to get through the first 10 minutes and then just break it down. And as Kevin very, very nicely explains there, you know, you don't have to attend every week. There's no compulsion. You can leave if it's not for you. But Kevin's also right that you could, just by sitting with yourself, just in that circle, and that it can really help.
I guess it's that balance, isn't it? As you say, kind of piece by piece, knowing where you're at. And as you say, Kevin, maybe it's also possible when we're feeling very low or overwhelmed, we'll have an idea of what's going to happen, which often isn't the case. And I suppose that ties back into kind of worry and anxiety as well. Often our mind's going to go to the worst case scenario. And that's often something that's quite common, isn't it, about people, that they might say about groups, like, I feel bad enough as it is. I don't need everyone else's struggles. But so again, it's maybe there's something about if you're in a place to come to the group, seeing for yourself what it's like, experiencing that, and then you can have a sense of that, you personally, because sometimes it's the kind of doing of things, isn't it? We can talk about things a lot, but it's actually the experience of it that can make the difference. So that's maybe something to bear in mind. There's another question in there that I thought maybe is quite interesting too. So Kevin, this is for you, but maybe we can all think a bit about it more generally. Just whether peer support was helpful in terms of any stigma which surrounds mental health issues by normalizing the issues. Probably one for all of us, I think. But what do people think about the groups maybe normalizing stigma?
It normalized, or it made it easier for me to discuss my mental health at the time. I suppose stigma is more kind of a society-wide issue, but it definitely normalized for me that, I can actually, or just made me realize I can say these things, I can get them out. After holding them in for years, I can verbalize them. And that was a big step. Even within a peer support group, I could verbalize what I was feeling. I could put words to a chaotic jumble in my head, a chaotic jumble of emotions that hadn't had words before, that were just feelings that I were living, just living in the moment constantly. And this was somewhere I could actually slow down, breathe, and get words out that weren't a jumbled mess. So that helped me a lot, just in being maybe the first step on a very, very long journey. And again, from being a facilitator, a lot of group members, this is their first place that they've been able to do that too. They've been able to actually have a voice. And we do actually say have a voice in the process we have. We speak about finding your voice. And your voice is just this internal inner monologue that never has an external voice. This can be the first place you find it. And that you realize, I can say these things. And it's okay to say these things. I can manage it. And maybe I can bring that outside the group. And I can start saying this to people I have relationships with family, even with employers, or with mental health professionals, because a recurring theme is people might go to GPs and they might go to therapists, but they don't really speak honestly or fully with them because they're still holding it back.
It's a big thing, isn't it? And you can be in therapy for a long time, and a lot of things are still very difficult to say. And I think that's really common and really normal. So if you're someone who's hearing that and thinking, yeah, there's some parts that are still difficult, that just makes you human, doesn't it? And it's different stages. So as you say, maybe Kevin, that finding your voice in the group can be a really helpful first step, maybe to saying something outside of the group, of whether like I'm struggling or actually things aren't okay at the moment, and maybe opening up those conversations. I suppose what we know and aware is that you're not alone in that. loads of other people will be having similar experiences too, and there is also help available. I don't know, Fiona or Rosemary, if you wanted to add anything into that stigma piece, or just as Kevin has mentioned.
I suppose in a very broad way, the whole stigma piece comes up in Ireland and you know, and in other countries, I would add. Yet I actually think that there was a significant sort of sea change in that over the period of COVID, because suddenly everybody knew what anxiety meant, because everybody was experiencing anxiety. For the first time, people who were very well and always very, I suppose, composed in their lives, and life just, you know, for some people is almost living in a happy bubble. And suddenly that bubble burst a bit around that time. And it was, I just thought it was quite significant, the number of people who started saying, God, I never understood what anxiety was, but I do now. Or I never understood my family member, but I sure do now. So it was sort of broke that down a bit. And I think it's given people the space now to use their voice a bit more and have courage, but to use it. And yet it's still frightening to have to almost be vulnerable, you know, to expose yourself to that vulnerability emotionally in front of others. It can feel risky, and yet in a peer support group, that risk is removed because we're all there for the same reason.
And the intention is to make it as safe as possible, isn't it? To allow that vulnerability, yeah, which is maybe hard in different situations. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's sort of, that idea about anxiety then became much more understandable, didn't it? Yeah, and I don't know, Fiona, if you wanted to add anything into that?
Yeah,
Or...
just on, I mean, I think what the other two have said, I completely agree with them. I also think that if somebody is struggling with anxiety or struggling with work issues, and if they, because it's always relationships and moods and feelings that come up in the meeting, and but sometimes you'd have somebody and they may have a work issue that is really causing them anxiety, and they're worried about their performance, and they're worried that they're being seen by sort of other people within the company. And it's extraordinary within a meeting how, if they get support from the group, somebody might say something very simple like, you know, did you go to somebody in HR, or did you speak to somebody, or did you take this approach or that? And you know, sometimes the person is sitting there and you suddenly see, oh, wow, this person has been in this situation before themselves, and this advice is good. And, you know, they might come back in the next week and say, I listened to what you said, and that really helped me open the conversation. Or, you know, so it's that peer support is, you cannot underestimate it. And as Kevin said earlier, as facilitators, the less we're saying, the better. We're just making sure that the place stays safe, and that, you know, that we speak respectfully for each other. But it is the group members who are just helping, and I think in a way destigmatizing, because you're sitting there, you could be sitting there with 14 other people in a group, and you're talking very openly about things. And for people who aren't used to maybe sharing how they actually are feeling, it can be hugely enabling to get support that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Worth doing, I think. Yeah, worth trying. And you, yeah, who knows what well, I guess we can talk about the benefits here, but it's who knows how it might benefit you, and maybe in different ways that we haven't spoken about. So yeah, it's a really, really helpful conversation. Thank you all so much for offering a bit of an insight into kind of maybe what practically happens and what happens emotionally, and maybe some of the kind of the results of that. Fiona, you had mentioned earlier, like Christmas is a tricky time, isn't it? We know that people living with mental health difficulties are probably going to it's more likely maybe to run into difficulty this time of year. And maybe just to say that, I guess that's kind of part and parcel too. For me, I'm very kind of keen on sort of normalizing that. For a lot of people, Christmas is awful, you know, and there's a way about managing that and naming, actually, these things are stressful for me, and it's okay to kind of seek help around it. And I think the groups are running, aren't they, throughout the Christmas period, both online and in person. Is that right?
Well, I think the week after Christmas, I think a lot of the centres where we
Okay.
hold meetings. Rosemary knows this better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're actually closed. So actually that's Rosemary's question.
No, there are just 3 dates that we're running
Yep.
no groups over Christmas, and they're the public holidays: Christmas Day, Stephen's Day, 25th and the 26th, and the 1st of January. So they're the 3 public holidays, and there are a couple of centres for as Fiona said, and they're either closed for 1 week or 2. But you know, some of them are running right through. So it just depends on the day of the week that the group is on.
Okay.
But we're going to continue with our Zoom groups, obviously, other than on the 3 public holidays. And a colleague of mine has kindly, I think today, but if it's not up already, the calendar of the group, the last one for the year and the first one for 2024 will be there. So there's a whole calendar of Christmas groups on.
And that's on the web, that's on the Aware website.
If it's not already up,
Yeah,
it will
it
be
will
up
be.
today.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I
sure.
guess maybe also to say, and it's if certainly someone is kind of needing support or just a bit of a break, we also have the phone line as well. So the that's 10 to 10 every day, and also the support mail. So if you can't get to a group on those the couple of days that it's not available, there is other support sort of available, isn't there? So I guess that would be the key message. Don't suffer alone. You know, there is sort of help out there if you just even need to talk to someone in that non-judgmental space that's available. So I just saw one last question in there that maybe is probably good to know in terms of someone is asking, is there a limit to the amount of people that can come to a group?
We normally try not to put a limit on it as such. I suppose your average group is like 8 attendees, but you can have anything from 3 to 14 or something, depends on the group. The 14s really would be something like Dublin City Centre or something on a really busy day, but that's not always the case, you know, so yeah.
And there was just one other one which I think is quite important about groups outside Dublin. So Cork, well, do you want to say, Rosemary, for in-person ones outside Dublin? And then obviously Zoom ones are everywhere,
The Zoom is, or naturally, we have we have 2 groups in Cork. We moved to a new venue quite recently in Cork on 22 Sullivan's Quay. And then we have a group in Limerick, which is in Mary I College. We have a group in Galway in Creenagallava Centre in Mill Street, in Tralee in the CDP Centre in Rock Street, and in Waterford in the Gateway Centre. And then we have our Dublin groups, obviously, in the Carmelite Centre. We have one in Leeson Street in the office. And we have one in Ballymun as well. So yeah, so they're all there, the in-person locations.
Great. Thanks, Rosemary. And they're all on the website as well for anyone who didn't catch all of them.
Yeah. And I mean, for the face-to-face, just to say, for the in-person groups, you know, sometimes maybe somebody suddenly has a really difficult day on them or whatever, and they may not have booked a place, and it is okay to turn up. You know, we're not going to turn people away. So I just want people to know that as well. It's really important for people to know that they're welcome.
That's really helpful. Yeah. So if you miss the registering, that's okay. You can still come. Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you all so much. I think it's a really, as I said, really instructive conversation about maybe what to expect and how it is. I wonder if I was to maybe end briefly with it's kind of maybe for each of you, the most important thing maybe for that you'd want someone to take away from our webinar today, who's maybe thinking about coming to a group or is wondering if it's right for them or maybe has experience of them. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe a line or two.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I suppose whatever you're anxious about, whatever you're afraid of when it comes to imagining yourself at the group, it's not going to be as bad as that. It's not going to be like that at all. Always try. It's always worth a try. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kevin.
I would agree with Kevin. Just come and have a look and allow yourself, just get into that room and just feel the welcome and the warmth, and you don't have to say anything until you're ready if that's if that's what suits you best. But just we're there, and I think the thing to say is we're always there. And there are some wonderful people who volunteer, and we just want to make it a really positive experience for people who come to the groups. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fiona. And Rosemary?
Yeah, I guess I would say that your mood matters, and it matters to us. It matters to the people at the groups. You're important, and you're not alone. We're here for you. Yeah, I think that's the key piece. We're here. We're community. We're here for each other.
Brilliant. That's a lovely note to end on. Yeah, so thank you, Rosemary. Thanks, Fiona, and thank you, Kevin, so much. As I said, a really good discussion, and hopefully, if you're watching this or listening and you're wondering about the group, do come along, or do have a look at our website, aware.ie, for more information. So moving on to the webinar for next year now. So the second Wednesday, so that's going to be the 10th of January, Investing in Your Mental Health, a Compassionate Approach. So we're really looking forward to that. So kind of thinking about supporting wellness in January and throughout the year. And certainly maybe just good to know as well that a lot of the education programs in Aware open up in January too. So they're kind of supported and guided to CBT, which is a good evidence base for depression. So yeah, I guess that maybe just leaves me just to say thanks to the panelists for joining today. Thanks for everyone for watching, both today and throughout the year. We really value your participation. If you're interested in looking at any of our past webinars, please do have a look. At the end of this webinar, we'll send a form for feedback. So please do let us know if there's topics that you want us to cover next year. And how you found the webinar today, and any kind of improvements or what you'd like to see more of. We're always really keen for feedback. And certainly thanks to the Aware team for facilitating the webinars throughout the year, and especially to the volunteers, Kevin and Fiona. Really incredible work that you do. We're very grateful. I guess the conversation today really highlights how valuable it is and what it means. So thank you very much. So yeah, thank you all, and I'll see you in 2024.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Kevin, Fiona, and thanks to all the volunteers and group members. Wishing you a peaceful end of the year.
You too. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.